Hi, so my name is Aman, and for my country study, I chose to look at Indonesia and see how the modernization theory can be applied. So, before we begin, I thought I'd give a little bit of background on Indonesia. Indonesia is located in Southeast Asia, and it's mostly comprised of thousands of volcanic islands turned into land. For much of its history, there has been violence and conflict over control of its land. It finally gained its own independence in 1949 after the Japanese freed them from the controlling Netherlands in World War II. In today's society, Indonesia is a relatively well-off country. They have made large strides towards industrialization and urbanization. Currently, the service and industry sectors account for almost 83% of the country's economy. In the 1950s, they were largely dependent on oil exports, but have since moved away from it. This helps them avoid what we discussed in class as the natural resource plague. This plague hinders a country's growth simply from their dependence on the natural resource they have in their land. Now that we have a bit of background, we can discuss the founding of Indonesia. A man named Sukarno was wrongfully put into one of the prisons of the controlling Netherlands. This same man was later freed by Japanese forces during World War II and would go on to become the first president of Indonesia, although this position was much more of a figurehead position. He would also later come back into power as a dictator. He was able to accomplish so much in an emerging country, he was applauded by almost everybody. However, it was not all smooth sailing from the start of his leadership. Indonesia began their government with a parliamentary democracy. In their first few years, however, they were forced to rotate cabinet members rapidly due to differences in opinions from many political parties that were thrown into office. Communist, Islamic, and nationalist states all wanted their ideas implemented, and it led to much political distress. After the Japanese had freed Sukarno from prison, and he lost his figurehead position to a failing parliamentary system, he came back into power as a dictator, and then led what he called a guided democracy. During his dictatorship, he kept his power by slaughtering thousands. This genocide went so far that the CIA report on him refers to him as one of the worst mass murderers of the 20th century. This was a large change to the previous thoughts towards him, as at one point the World Bank praised Sukarno's economic transformation as a dynamic economic success and called Indonesia the model pupil of the global economy. Even Bill Clinton referred to Sukarno as our kind of guy. Now, before we discuss his policies and changes, I would like to explain modernization theory a bit better. Modernization theory attempts to explain why underdeveloped countries are the way they are. According to the theory, things like particularism, patriarchy, and fatalism can hold a country back in terms of modern world development. The main concepts include individualism as well as allowing everyone in your country to achieve their full potential. Underlying this theory, however, there is pressure to align your values with that of Western culture in order to gain their economic support. Prior to Sukarno and before its modernization, Indonesia had many problems troubling its country. Water was unable to reach all of its citizens due to poor plumbing. There was homelessness due to a lack of affordable housing, and class division was spreading throughout the country. The values held by Indonesia were those which were stated as traditional values by modernization theory, and traditional values would hold a country back from development. Sukarno knew that he had to make some major changes in order to help save his country. One of the first changes he made was he solved the feudalistic view that their country had on the way they treated women. Prior to the 1960s, there was little respect for women and their rights. Rape and many other abuses were commonplace in their society. According to modernization theory, this will hold your country back as you are only allowing half of your country to participate in its advancements. Additionally, Sukarno began a push for education, which according to modernization theory will help in two different ways. First, a push for education will help each individual reach their full potential as well as allow them to learn firsthand what they think is best for the country. Secondly, this push for education will lead the country away from collectivism. By encouraging the young to stay in school rather than help their families, they begin the shift towards more of a Western culture. Finally, Sukarno made his own speeches and writings mandatory subjects for all Indonesian students, and all mass media in the country was required to report only on his ideology and action. First, making his speeches mandatory to read helped push education on the young, as he would have to teach children to read before they could read his speeches. Secondly, he created a push and market for mass media by creating ways for the public to access his speeches and writing. Overall, the study of this country has caused me a bit more confusion on the side of modernization theory. The focus of modernization theory was that shifting the values of a country would in turn change the way that it was run. Indonesia, however, seemed as if it was forced to modernize at the hand of Sukarno, who would murder all that would oppose him. Even after all of this, however, the policies he put into place were in line with Western values, and the country was set up to be more successful after his ruling than before, regardless of the things he did. In conclusion, this showed me that modernization theory is very powerful, as the leader was able to use it in order to advance his country, even while slaughtering thousands.